I find that with my nieces as well. Like if I were to say to them, I will say, well, what about, because I think they're really excited about socialism. I personally am not a fan of socialism. I think that we're not prepared for that. When you talk about universal health care, I lived in London before, and I know that some people, it sounds great, but when you have to wait years to get surgery, if you don't have private health care, I just know the nuances of that. And I think that when you look in the US, yeah, universal health care may sound great, but we are short. We worked on a project with National Health Service Corps. We're short 100,000 primary care physicians. So how is that going to work? And then AI is going to get rid of all these jobs, which is going to replace the tax base. How is that going to work, right? So I think it's just not, when I present that to her, and she's like, well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. That's for y'all older people to figure out, right? So they want the benefits, but they don't want that's my thing. It's like, show me who's going to pay for it. And don't tell me that 2% of the rich is going to pay for it. Like, it can't that's a non-starter for a lot of people. So when you have those conversations with them about education in particular, what do you get into how moving education to the state is going to impact their life, their community, their future? Because I don't really think they understand that.
Just in that one particular class that we do, I have a module dedicated just higher education, and we touch on state versus federal, but there's sort of a deeper issue there, where in the United States, we have officially designated students as consumers so they could be marketed to directly, and that's why the money stopped flowing to universities and started flowing directly to the states, then to universities, and the money stopped. So states started marketing more. And now if you look at advertising for universities, it's about this amazing dorm with pool tables and pools.
Hold on. You got to walk me back through that, Dean. So what happened? How did that come about?
In the 70s and 80s, we started changing how we designate a student or a potential student. And so now they are a consumer. They are labeled as a consumer, so they could be marketed to directly. So less money goes, the government provides less money to state institutions, which had a lot of freedom when they did that. They would get the money, they would be able to develop classes that they thought were important to know in the future. And now when it becomes, when the student is a consumer, now they like, you know what? I have to get this student to come here. So I'm going to talk about pool tables. I'm going to talk about these fancy dorm rooms, right? I'm going to talk about all these great amenities and the actual courses and education. Two things happens. One, they get pushed aside in the discussion. And then two, it's like, well, I can't really have this major because it's not producing somebody who can graduate and get a job doing that, right? And that sounds okay on paper, but what happens is then you're just narrowing it down, and you're just making it so it's just like, we need an accountant and we need a teacher, right? But there's a lot of things that we don't know where the world is going, and so we want to
especially with AI now, right?
Yes. Especially with AI. Now communication is actually becoming the main sought after skill from employers. They want people who have these soft skills because they're so lacking.
Wow. So what does that look like? So I believe in the arts. I believe in the creatives, the creative process, design, fine art, music. What is that going to look like? Because even with AI, we're going to lose all these white collar jobs. I still feel like there's an art to culinary skills. I feel like there's an art to being a fine artist, music, dance, like entertainment. I feel like that's still very valuable. And especially having a child, I know that kids learn through play. They also learn through art therapy as well. That's been very effective. So you're telling me that the government took the funding away from the schools. So now the schools have to mark. Now, that's not, of course, at the Ivy level though, right? That's mostly at like state institutions.
Well, some of the Ivy schools, they have so much money from endowments.
Right.
Right. So they have a lot more freedom.
Right. Which is what we're
and
seeing play out with Harvard,
yeah.
the
And
pushback.
so,
Okay.
but when you look at other schools that are that don't quite have that freedom, they do need to market amenities. They need to be able to get you excited enough to come to their particular school. It's more difficult now to say, hey, we have a really solid accounting degree, because they're looking at the students are used to being marketed to, and so they're looking at great accounting degree or accounting degree plus they've got all these cool amenities, right? And so that's what a lot of the money is being spent on universities around the country for a couple decades now.
Oh, really? And so on average, how much money does, I know you may not know this because you're not in administration, but are we talking like a millions of dollars, or like at a university level that might be a state university, a well-known state university?
Yes, it is millions, and I don't have the number in front of me, but I do have the numbers when we do it in class. I just can't remember off the top of the head. But there's some schools that spend in the 20% of their money on marketing. And so that could be money spent on classes, on education.
Right,
And,
on
and
curriculum.
we're forced to, do it on marketing, and to take it back to states
Mhm.
versus federal. What happens is you might have a state that says, you know what, I don't, this art therapy, no, get rid of it. Right. Music
Mm.
therapy. We just need teachers and accountants. We need to populate the empty jobs that we have out there. And there's nothing on the circumference of the core jobs. And so then we lose out on that because we have the greater diversity of knowledge that's being lost.
Yeah. And what happens, like, when you look at just from an education perspective, what's going on with the curriculum? How is the curriculum decided at a university level? Like, who decides what goes in the curriculum, what students are going to be learning?
So the departments at like the communication department at every school, they'll design a course, right? They'll do it with the input of us, and we might design it wholly. The department, the chair, they'll look at it, make any changes, and then it has to get approved from the university level on the course, and so of the course. And so then you have some risks if the federal government now is dangling and saying, hey, I only want you to teach this and this and this, right? They then might subconsciously say, well, I don't want to approve these 7 courses because they're too fluffy, right? And I don't want the government cut money. So I'm going to just focus on these, core elemental classes that's not going to ruffle any feathers. So
But it's not
we have
going to be game changing as far as critical theory.
yeah.
Oh, wow. And so with that being the case, then why you don't have to answer this if you're not comfortable with it, but when you're looking at people learning with Udemy, online courses, training schools, and YouTube, and making a decent salary. Like, I was watching this guy the other day, and I think AC Hampton, and he's making millions of dollars a year. I don't know if he's college educated or not, but he's making millions of dollars a year, and he does drop shipping. And so you have a lot of Gen Z. What's going to happen to education? Because what's my incentive to want to go to college if I could still travel the world, do digital content? Like, why am I going to go and get an accounting degree? I'm much more happier doing this, and I can make a good living.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if somebody can, more power to them. But I think what happens is that's a little bit of an availability heuristic where we only see the very, very few people that are successful. Like, we tend to think of dropping out of an Ivy League school and starting a tech company is a real viable thing because, Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates all dropped out and are gazillionaires. However, we don't see the 99.9999% that, never are going to make it to that. And so what happens is that's probably not the best way to go. I mean, if you have an opportunity, sure, go ahead and take it. But an education, it offers so much more. One, you're dedicating 4 years to a thing, and you are accomplishing that thing, right? That means a lot. You've learned how to manage time. You've learned how to show up. You learned how to write. You learned how to be criticized, right? So whatever the major is, there's right there is a benefit. And then the second thing is when you're going to be an astrophysicist, for example, you have to learn some communication skills, right? So you're a better astrophysicist. You and I talked briefly. I think we're both fans of Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yes, very much so.
He is a communicator. He's a master
awesome. Yeah.
communicator, right? I know some astrophysicists and they know their stuff, but when they communicate, they don't,
Right.
They've never been trained in communication. And so what happens, there's this loss. Their knowledge and their passions are lost outside their circle because they don't communicate. Carl Sagan had said something, and I'm going to butcher it, but he said something: when we send astronauts, to space or to the moon, we need to not just send scientists. We need to send a poet. Like one of the group should be a poet. Otherwise, the scientists can't come back and express and illustrate and get you driven about space because they're looking at it through the mindset of an engineer or a particle physicist or whatever it may be, where the poet can speak to the masses and motivate us. And that kind of sums up, what I think.
I did a business delegation to Germany for a huge conference, I think Hannover Massey, a couple of years ago. And it was so interesting because I think it was BMW, one of the top auto brands. And they were saying how they were hiring people for their engineering, their tech team. I was like, oh, wow, the job sounded amazing. And I was like, oh, well, I said, too bad I don't have an engineering degree. And they were like, what? They were like, no, we hire people who are artists to work on. I couldn't believe it. Going to your point, because they want to have, again, the diversity of thought, input. And I was like, oh, my God. So it's just interesting that when we, like you said, like we started, when you talk about education, diversity, it's also then the skill set and the ideas, the fact that they leverage that to how does the car look? How does it feel when you sit in it? What's the aesthetic of the car? Like just different things that most people would just think there would be a bunch of boring engineers, but then you have like the creative director, this artsy person that comes in and is working on an auto design team. I'm like, what? But those are the kind of things that I think, is often missed and people don't really discuss when we have conversations about diversity.